Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Aniagolu. Now, as you might have heard, the Democratic Party in the United States has formally nominated Joe Biden for president on the second evening of its virtual national convention. He was proposed through video speeches from states around the country. Two former presidents, Bill Clinton and Jimmy Carter, voiced their support for Mr. Biden. Prominent Republicans also spoke, including former U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell.
Joe won't just put his signature on a check and try to fool you into thinking it came from him. He'll work to make sure that your paycheck reflects your contribution to and your stake in a growing economy. In this job interview, the difference is stark. You know what Donald Trump will do with 4 more years: blame, bully, and belittle. And you know what Joe Biden will do: build back better. It's Trump's us versus them America against Joe Biden's America, where we all live and work together. It's a clear choice. The future of our country is riding on it.
When I ran for president in 1976, Joe Biden was my first and most effective supporter in the Senate. For decades, he has been my loyal and dedicated friend. Joe has the experience, character, and decency to bring us together and restore America's greatness. We deserve a person with integrity and judgment, someone who is honest and fair, someone who is committed to what is best for the American people. Joe is that kind of leader, and he is the right person for this moment.
With Joe Biden in the White House, you will never doubt that he will stand with our friends and stand up to our adversaries, never the other way around. He will trust our diplomats and our intelligence community, not the flattery of dictators and despots.
American Secretary of State Colin Powell there, ending that sequence that included 2 former American Democratic presidents. Well, let's talk now to a man who knows a thing or two about U.S. conventions. Bill Barnard is a historian of American politics. He's attended 5 Democratic and 2 Republican conventions. He's also the former chair of Democrats abroad in the UK, and he joins me now from Oxford. Good to talk with you, Bill. I understand you prefer Bill to William.
Bill is fine.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for joining us. So finally, after decades, Joe Biden now has the seal of approval from the Democrats to run for president. I mean, tell us more about how it happened from your observational perch, as it were.
Well, I think after he left office as vice president 4 years ago, or 3.5 years ago, I think he felt that his political career, long and distinguished as it was, had come to an end. And at least as he tells the story, it's really the events in Charlottesville, the shameful events in Charlottesville, that led him to think that perhaps he should make one more go at the presidency. He'd run a couple of times before that, and without a great deal of success, to be sure. And when he entered, the front runner at that point was Bernie Sanders. And Bernie Sanders did very well, commanding in most states about 1/3 of the Democratic electorate when they voted in the primaries. In the end, though, and especially after the developments with the pandemic and all the rest, it became clear that the party as a whole was tending towards the Biden direction, or at least that part of the political spectrum that he occupies. And really, after Super Tuesday, after his win in South Carolina, with the vital support of Jim Clyburn, the House member from South Carolina, a House member from South Carolina, he did very well, and it revived his candidacy. And then the Super Tuesday, he basically swept the field and very rapidly became the presumptive nominee. Others who had been in the race either just before Super Tuesday, like Amy Klobuchar and Mayor Pete, withdrew and endorsed him, and he basically swept the field and became at that point a presumptive nominee, something that was recognized formally and officially last night.
And presumably he has your endorsement as well.
Absolutely. He's been a mainstay of Democratic politics. He's been a pragmatic progressive throughout his career. He led the charge on much of the legislation that has protected female rights and people in domestic violence. He was chairman of the Judiciary Committee for some years. He's had some problems along the way, to be sure, as anyone who has a 40-year career in public life would have. But it is an honorable career, and throughout it all, he has shown that he has the kind of character, a man of compassion, a man of empathy, a man of competence, in contrast to the present occupant of the White House. And I think that's one of the reasons for his broad appeal.
Well, I mean, I suppose that the question, there, I mean, people like you who are, part of the Democratic faithful, I mean, the former presidents who spoke, they all believe that Joe Biden is someone who has a superior character, who will be a much more unifying figure for the whole country. But beyond the sort of the razzmatazz, the buzz and the Democratic faithful, does the country share that belief? That is the question, isn't it?
I think the country is hungry for someone who can unify it, who can work with people across the political spectrum, left and right, to get things done and to solve problems. And I think that's exactly the appeal that Joe Biden has. People do sense that he is a man of great empathy and a man of great character. Throughout his years in Washington, D.C., he commuted back and forth by Amtrak, by train, to Wilmington, Delaware, which was his home, some hour and a half or so away, on a daily basis. He didn't make his home in Washington. He didn't become a creature of Washington. And he did that in part because of the importance that he placed upon his family. And it's those kinds of values, those kinds of sentiments that he has and that people sense in him and see in him, the sheer decency of the man. And that's such in contrast to the kind of chaos that we've seen in the White House and the kind of character that we've seen, or the lack of it, in the person who is the president of the United States, that president.
And the nights, I presume you watched the entirety of that virtual convention. The night's keynote speaker, it could be said, was Jill Biden, who spent 8 years as America's second lady when her husband was vice president. And she laid out the case for a new family at the White House, didn't she?
Yes, and she made the point about Joe Biden's character, that here he was, a man who had early grief in his life, incredible sadness with the death of his wife and his daughter early on, just at the very time that he was assuming his role in the U.S. Senate. And she laid out how he had worked so hard to heal his family and to restore his family to a strong, forceful unit, and that he would do the same for the U.S. And I think in large measure that's true, that at least he has a good chance at doing it and to move beyond the kind of divisiveness and the kind of chaos. There's a certain fatigue in the American body politic at the moment, fatigue at constant chaos, a constant turmoil that surrounds the White House, and the kind of domination of the news cycle that Trump has, regardless of whether he's endorsing an unknown and unproven remedy for the virus or whatever. But at least there's a longing for a return to some kind of civility, a move away from the coarsened political dialogue that we've had over the last few years.
And was that longing for a return to civility, as you put it, also manifested in the featuring of prominent Republicans backing Mr. Biden over Donald Trump at that virtual convention?
I think that's been a theme, certainly, of the first two nights, in particular, not only to focus on the character and competence and compassion of Joe Biden, but also to play up the side of his personality that appeals beyond the Democratic hardcore, those of us who are ardent Democrats. Just as in 2018, the Democrats did very well among Black women in particular, and among white suburban women as well. Those are the elements that are the backbone of the backbone of the Democratic Party, and that suburban white element is an increasingly important part of it as well. And I think his appeal to people who go beyond partisan identification, who are willing, certainly in the current crisis, to put their country first, that's been apparent. It's been one of the things they wanted to drive home the first two nights. I think the following two nights will perhaps begin to focus a bit more on the positive program that the Biden administration wants to bring to bear in the country.
And you're somebody who's attended lots of conventions. Not the virtual ones, the real ones, as it were. You attended, I understand, 5 Democratic conventions, 2 Republican conventions. And what we saw in this virtual convention, this current one, is a lot of messages lashing out at Donald Trump and rallying the Democratic troops. Is that normal? Is that the way that normally these conventions go? Or is it taken on a much more sort of, if you like, a bitter taste this time?
Now, let me point out very quickly that the attendance of the two Republican conventions was as a political commentator, not as a participant. But it's different in some respects. You have to remember that, if you look back and think back to what you've seen over the last 2 days, rarely have you seen people from the stage or from the films that have been showed hammering Republicans. They've been hammering Trump. And part of that reason is that they know that they want to appeal beyond their own Democratic base and to bring in moderate Republicans who were dismayed with Trump, who perhaps held their nose last time to vote for him because they thought in policy terms he might turn out to be okay, but who have been appalled by the record of the president and the character of the president, the way he's handled both foreign affairs and domestic affairs. And it's an effort to appeal to those people. But every convention has its own portion of partisan dissension and of partisan jabs aimed at the other side. Let me just say one thing, though, for some of your viewers. Any American citizens who live in Nigeria, for example, if they're an American citizen, they're guaranteed, federally guaranteed, the right to vote. It's in federal law. They can vote whether or not they voted in the state they last lived in, or registered in the last state they lived in, whether or not they own property or have any other connection to the state that they last lived in. But American citizens have the absolute right to vote in federal elections for president, vice president, for Senate and Congress. And if they are interested in that, all they have to do is go to votefromabroad.org, votefromabroad.org, and it'll work you through what you have to do, the form you have to fill out to register to vote.
Okay, and just to clarify, because there's a lot of talk about postal voting and mail-in voting and controversy and all that, Americans abroad, such as yourself, can vote, can they?
Yes, we vote in the state in which we last lived.
Now, they've got the business end of the convention done, presumably with the formal roll call vote. Are you pleased as a Democrat with how the events have gone so far?
I was one who greatly worried about how in the world we could bring this off, or how the Republicans can bring theirs off, for that matter. Having seen and been a participant in past conventions, I didn't really understand exactly how it could be done. There have been a couple of times that I thought that a couple of efforts that didn't quite make it, but there are others that have really gone very well. I thought in general the way that the roll call was handled has gotten very good reviews in the states across the board on social media and in the press as well. It showed the diversity of America. It sort of enlivened it. And even though generally roll calls are relatively boring, they have to be done. But this one was rather interesting to see the diversity of the American people shown as each state, people from the state rose to cast their votes.
Okay, I want to thank you very much indeed for joining us. A very, very enlightening discussion with you. Bill Barnard is a historian of American politics. He's also the former chair of Democrats Abroad, and he joined me there from Oxford in the UK. And you're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat about the Democratic convention in the US. We'll analyze the proceedings through the eyes of a former Nigerian presidential candidate. Stay with us.